Hello, everybody out there in internet worlds, and welcome to the reading room once again for another interview discussion. And we have on today my friend and amazing person, Dr. J. Bundy. Do you prefer being called the doctor, or are you okay with
Jay's
just Jay?
fine.
Or
Jay's, I mean,
Jay's fine.
I'm with friends and
I,
family here, So
I've noticed you're very casual about the credentials.
yeah, yeah. I try to stay super casual about it. Once you get it,
Yes.
I sent my I actually sent my PhD to my mom. So interesting story. I went back to Jersey I don't know, a month or so ago for a job interview, and I got to visit my mom, and it was actually the first time I had seen my stuff. I was like, "Mom, can I see my stuff? I've never actually seen my PhD. Did they really
Okay.
send it to you?" Yeah.
It's interesting because the more real the credentials are, I've noticed the less that the people that have it want to talk about it, and like people like Hovind will put it on everything,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
people
yeah.
with the actual credentials would be like, it doesn't matter,
Yeah, I
like
don't
it's
even my
whatever.
students, it's weird. I just have them call me Jay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
all
I'm like,
good, mate. All
yeah, I
good.
always say I say send that stuff to your mom, and it'll mean more to them than it does, sitting on your wall or whatever.
Well, I think that you should be at least, sort of maybe not proud is the wrong word, but at least satisfied with that achievement, because it is an achievement,
Absolutely. Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I totally understand. Like my doctor doesn't want him to call him doctor. It's just his name kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh, uh,
exactly.
I think
I will
does
say
the
this: you should be
doctor?
satisfied with it because don't do it for the pay raise. The pay bump will be disappointing. So I hope you're satisfied with the
Well,
accomplishment.
according to the creationists, you're making those big
Oh,
bucks
those big
in sort of
university
yeah,
bucks.
yeah, 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 along with all the geologists and everyone out there, raking it in with the private jets and stuff.
Yeah.
Do you think do you think it's harder to build rapport with people if you are using the doctor? Is that a concern at all? Like you're sort of because I noticed that like my doctor, my family physician sort of says, "Hey, I like to be one-on-one with people," kind of thing. Do you think that's a factor at all?
Yeah, I think definitely there's something to be said for that. I think a lot of people feel it's like pretentious. Also,
Mm,
it's not used amongst your colleagues, right? So like when I'm around
right.
like we don't call each other doctor, we just use our first
Yeah.
name. So it feels more like, yeah, inviting somebody to just treat you like even a colleague would, which is not
Mhm.
to be that formal. I do think though it interacts with who you're around and if you feel safe. So like I definitely think there's something to um maybe if you're like part of a marginalized group in some way, you feel like more of a need to like have
Right.
people recognize your credentials. And I especially feel that like more in spaces where I'm challenged. Like on your channel, I'm like, but if I were to go into
Yeah.
like
Yep.
some person who's trying to like put down my work, then you're
Yeah.
more like, let me be clear about, my
Yeah.
training sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me pull rank because I actually do have something to back me up on this.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, we sort of it's weird. We go way back to like over a year ago where we sort
Yeah.
of
I've been
met and
feeling for a long time.
yeah, and sort of really got along. And you were going to debate Hoven and stuff. And I did want to touch on debates and like your attitudes and approaches were along the lines of sort of a more I guess spectacle kind of WWE
To
kind
some
of
extent,
idea.
yeah, yeah, for
To
sure.
some extent, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It was very interesting talking to you about that. A lot of scientists believe that they shouldn't debate people, kind of thing. Do
Yes.
you? And I think I remember you saying that a lot of your colleagues and your mentors and the people that you sort of talking
Yeah,
with
yeah.
said,
My teaching mentor at the time didn't think I should. Yeah.
right,
It's really tough. I definitely a lot of my colleagues don't think you should engage with them at all. And I think they have a point in sort of a principled way, but in another way, I think being so principled isn't pragmatic. I think the idea was sort of I'm sure you've heard it, but by engaging them, you're making them seem more legitimate, or there's the
Right.
concerns about platforming, and I think those are legit. Um, but I think to some extent, and it depends who you talk to, but some of them almost say it like ignore them and they'll go away type of thing. And I think if we're honest about it, they
Well,
haven't gone away.
yeah, I don't think that's the case.
Yeah,
Um,
me either.
so, I mean, maybe there is, like, because you see people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's just a wonderful science communicator. I mean, he doesn't debate or anything, but he does sort of do mic drops on flat earthers and
Sure,
things like
sure.
that. Like, I'm wondering if that's a better approach, or I'm struggling to think of Neil deGrasse Tyson having an actual debate with, say, Austin
It's
Whitsett kind of thing.
Yeah, it's really tough too. And again, I don't think we do ourselves any favors amongst professionals, because I think we try to split hairs too much. So a lot of people don't consider, there's gradations of scientists, right? And a lot of times we have very different jobs. And so a lot of
Yes, yeah,
times somebody like a Neil deGrasse Tyson or some other people, they're literally considered science communicators, almost as though that's like a separate and distinct profession from being like an active professor or a researcher. And sometimes to be honest, we don't even treat people who do research and teaching necessarily like they're the same, right? And so,
right,
yeah,
right.
yeah. And so they're really, and I think that's kind of unfortunate. But it just kind of is the way it is. It's unfortunate for people like me, because I value the science communication so much, and it just feels like a shame that it isn't valued more professionally. Because at the end of the day, people have jobs, right? And they're trying to
Yeah.
keep their contracts, they're trying to get tenure, they're trying to get promoted, they're trying to get grants. And I think we need to find a way to encourage more researchers and active teachers to do the communication part and reward them for it. That way it is worth their time. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I actually
Well,
think, so I was gonna say,
no, go
I
ahead.
just think that, I think that's part of it too. Like, I don't think it's just don't engage with them because it's a waste of time in terms of like, you won't win them over, but it's also like, it's a waste of time, and like, the university isn't going to reward you for this.
Right. Well, I think with sort of a democracy, you have to at least convince people that you're working in their best interests for the government to be able to give out grants and things like that. Or else, all then you've got is corporate interests. So I think science communication, maybe not, obviously you can't communicate absolutely everything, but I think that it's important that people at least understand the benefits and the research that field is doing, so they can vote on it with an understanding of what they're actually doing out
Yeah,
there,
yeah.
rather than a lot of the times we hear from flat earthers, oh, NASA, what do they do, kind of thing, and it's like, are you joking? And like, evolution hasn't done anything for, and it's like, evolution research, what are you talking about? I do realize that I'm a terrible host and I've missed completely what your field is and what you're doing, so maybe just take this quickly. I'm assuming everybody knows you already, Jay, because you get around. So I'm assuming that. But I think for new viewers, I think maybe we should go through who you are and what you actually do,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
sort of
sure,
what
sure.
your channel is about.
Yeah, yeah. So my name is Jay Bundy. I'm an experimental evolutionary biologist. It's a fancy way of saying I'm an evolutionary biologist, but that I primarily do experiments that test evolutionary theory. Actually, I do most of my work with what are called digital organisms. I did graduate from the Lenski lab, so a lot of people out there have heard of the Lenski long-term evolution experiment. So I did get to work on that experiment while I was in graduate school. And yeah, I do research and teaching. And yeah, I know a lot of people come to my channel. I was come from a serious Christian family. I was raised religious, and actually like worked in ministry and was a community organizer for a church. And I realize sometimes on my channel, even, I don't talk about, we give all these people like their flowers when they're like, oh my goodness, so and so used to work in ministry, and this person over here was a worship leader, and like I never
Mhm.
like talk about the fact of like how heavily involved in the church I actually was. So um, I sometimes feel like I should mention that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, I mean, it's an interesting background. So how did you did you always know that you wanted to go into biology? Was that sort of
No,
a lifelong
no,
thing, or
no, no,
just
not at all.
sprung on you
No,
halfway through?
yeah, I got suckered into science.
Yeah.
Um,
It's a
yeah, no,
common story, yeah.
well, I'm a worship musician. I'm a drummer. I shouldn't say I'm a worship. I'm a drummer. I've been involved
Mm,
in worship ministry most of my life. Most of my family is, and so I do drums and I also do sound, like recording, mixing, all that type of stuff. And so growing up, I just wanted to play drums. I wanted to be a musician. That was like the first thing I knew I could do really well and and kind of be great at. And I ended up going to Penn State on an academic scholarship. I was actually only applying to like a couple different music programs, and I had friends who told me you need to apply to Penn State because you're graduating from a Pennsylvania high school, like you
sure.
just should. It's like you
Yeah.
should do it. And I did, and then they like recruited me. And so that was the
Mm,
first kind of like hard right, because I was planning to go to school for music, and then I ended up at like this huge university and literally had no idea what to do. Like they didn't have a jazz music program, so I wasn't going to do music, and I didn't know what to do. So I was going to go to law school and become a dating coach. Horrible choices, just way too much power at that point in my life.
right.
Just really to have my head on straight. But that's what I wanted to do. And so I ended up reading a lot about sort of human biology and human evolution because I was just trying to understand human beings from like the perspective of a predictable system, literally. And so I ended up reading a lot that had to do with evolution, and I didn't really realize that that's what I was doing at all. Um, and I got involved with the sociology program. I was a TA for a class called the Sociology of Race, and I was a facilitator. So I knew I was like really into sociology, thought I was really into sociology and psychology. I took some time off, and one of my mentors, my advisor, said, when you come back, I want you to take a course in evolutionary biology. And my actual response was, have I ever said the word biology to you? Like I was offended. Like I was like, I
Right.
thought you knew me. I thought we were friends. Like, why would you say that to me? But I took a class called Sex and Evolution. I really liked it.
Yep.
The professor started talking about all these people I had been reading. And so I met with him. He gave me a bunch of papers to read. Like I didn't even know at that point that like
Mm,
scientists wrote papers. Like I thought scientists wrote books, right? And so it was weird to me that
yeah.
I was like, oh, like I'm into this stuff, and then he was like, yeah, read these papers. Like,
Yeah.
so
What the
I
hell are
started,
these things?
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I must admit there's something about papers that is, I don't know. I mean, some are difficult to read, but it's the lack of any kind of superficialness of it, like they cut straight to the heart of the matter.
yes, yes.
Books explain things in analogies and sort of so we can understand them, but there's something about papers, in my opinion, that are just no nonsense whatsoever.
Yeah, and most
And
scientists don't write books, at least in
right,
the hard STEM fields. And if they do, it's usually like a textbook for a class. Like my professor had written one of those, and all, or later in your career, kind of a retrospective. You want to share everything you learned over your
yeah,
career with the public. But yeah, so that was my introduction to papers, and then I volunteered in the lab, and so I just kind of and that was biological anthropology. So then I thought that I really did like doing the research, and I thought I'd do that because I was going to study like sexual selection in humans and human mating systems and all this type of stuff. And then I went out to a conference to present my research, and that's when I was like recruited by Rich Lenski. And he said to me, "Sounds like you want to get some street cred as an evolutionary biologist." And I was like, "Yes, yes." But literally, Mark, my point is,
yeah,
at that point, I still thought I was going to law school. I literally thought I
mhm,
was gonna go to law school. I just thought doing research was like cool and it'd
yeah,
like make me a better lawyer to like understand how scientists deal with evidence or whatever. And
yep.
then even when I got recruited into like the graduate program, I thought I'd just get my PhD and then go to law school. But I was just
So
like hanging
what is
out.
it that
Yeah.
grabbed you about it? What is it that grabbed you about evolution? And the sort of, is it the systems? Is it understanding how it contributed to all of these different facets of human
Yeah, I was
behavior?
honestly, it's like as a young person, I was reading stuff that was wild. Like I read this book called Sperm Wars. I think Robin Baker is the name of the author, if I'm remembering this correctly. And in this book, it like gives you these little like anecdotal stories, like almost like a scene out of a it's almost like you're reading a scene out of a soap opera or something. And it's like
Mhm.
the scene from a couple's life or whatever. And then it goes into like, well, how do we understand the biology that leads to the
Right.
motivation of the
Mhm.
people in the scene from the perspective of literal sperm competitions. That's why it's called
Yeah, yeah.
Sperm Wars, right? And then talking about, different examples throughout nature and stuff. So I was just reading stuff that was literally blowing my mind. It was just like
Mm.
crazy. It was just like a mind-blowing way to think about people, but it made sense because it was like, oh, we're animals and this is biology, and now I'm starting to
Right.
see us as a systematic as a system, like people's behavior.
Yeah.
It's not, I don't want to say people are predictable. I know that makes us feel like we're not special, but kind of in the aggregate we are, right? And that's really
Well,
powerful.
I think there's a lot of our behavior that is sort of ruled by sort of evolutionary hangover, if you will. Like we kind of think ourselves as doing this and doing that, just sort of, we've got
Yes.
our own control over our own life, and a lot of it is these reactions that we have to danger, say, or to our wants and our desires. A lot of it is based upon what our, we want to be safe, and we want to be, all these things, and that's evolutionarily based, and unless I'm
Right.
incorrect, it absolutely is. But I just going to pause for 1 second and
Sure,
sort of
sure.
go through. So everybody's been hitting me with the readership. So Robin gifted a readership. Thank you so much. It hit
Oh, that's
Captain Butt. So
awesome.
congratulations, Captain. Captain, my Captain. Winner, winner, chicken dinner. Go for it. We've got Yahooligan gifted a readership to Zach B. Hancock. Thank you so much, Yahooligan. Big supporter of the channel and a really nice guy. Thanks so much. And yeah, apart from that, we've got a comment by Yahooligan. I will get to the questions at the end. Al's got a question, but I'll get to it at the end. Save that for the end. Yahooligan, this message took 7 months to compose. Yes, yes, it did. Actually, I should be showing this. Where's my uh I'm just out of sorts at the moment. This message took 7 months. Yeah, it sure did. It sure did, mate. Thank you.
That's
Um,
awesome.
yeah, and this idea, and I really love sort of the way that you talk about it, the way that we talk about sort of all of these things that affect us now, like that evolution is in this, because I guess the way that I hear it talked about a lot in the young Earth creationist is, oh, you think evolution happened, and it's like, well, not really. We think it's still happening.
Yeah,
And one of the
absolutely.
things I wanted to talk to you about was, um, what do we know about where humans are going evolutionarily speaking? Like what do we know about how we're going to change? And of course that brought up visions of idiocracy and things like that, like the
Honestly, I don't
movie
yeah,
Idiocracy.
I don't think we know. And I think that's what scares
Yeah.
me, right?
Right.
And so one of the things that is kind of important to my research is this idea of contingency, the idea that
Oh, I think Jay has evolved past his people. I think. Hello, Jay, you've stopped.
I'm gonna
You've
say.
stopped.
Yeah, am I
Back.
back?
You're back. Sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
you
think I had
froze for
I
a
had
second.
something disconnect on my end. All right. All
That's
right.
all right.
So
That's okay. No, all
so
good.
this idea is basically like you can think of it as like path dependence. We call it contingency, right? But it's the idea that where
Right.
you can go in the future or what's even possible is dictated by what's
Yep.
happening presently or what happened in the past. And so
Mhm.
there's all these things that allow us, we think, to make projections. Like we see people are living longer lives due to advances in healthcare or things like that, right? And we have advances in technology that allow us to, certainly predict a lot. But there's all this other stuff. Like um, I would have never predicted our response to during the pandemic, for instance. That
Mm.
totally blew my mind. I literally thought that was sort of one of those when the rubber meets the road type of moments. You'll see people set aside politics or whatever. Everybody's going to get serious, because it's, this is not a drill. But we didn't see that, right? And so I just think there's all of these things that are constantly happening as, world events around us are unfolding. And I think their trajectory changing, but I think their trajectory changing in ways that are perhaps very unpredictable.
Well, I think the response, I think some people took it seriously and some people didn't. And I presume you're talking about the people that didn't, which there are a lot more people in your country than mine that didn't take it seriously, because in mine we had very little sort of compared to the US. I think that the rates of death were incredibly small. And I think I said to my wife, like, if this was a trial for a much more virulent and deadly disease, we kind of failed it. And that is scary, because do you think that was a good response from your country?
No, I think it was terrible.
Right.
And what surprised me, and I don't want to get too into it, but I guess my main point is that when these type of things happen, I think their trajectory changing. Like I said, I just think they're surprises, and we don't know. Like you can't put the genie back in the bottle. Once they happen, right, and we go this way. For instance, now we might be living with that particular virus forever, right? And that could have knocked time. Actually, people have predicted that knocked time off the life expectancy of most of us, right? And so I think if you would have predicted, like, okay, maybe it's predictable that something like this would happen, right? Because viruses emerge and da-da-da-da-da. If you would have said something like, well, it could happen and it could shut the world down real quick, but we could actually have this really pretty rapid response, and we could get things, sort of dealt with rather, expediently. That would have sort of predicted a certain way of handling it and certain consequences. But then the fact that we could do that, but couldn't predict the lack of uptake or the lack of policy supporting the uptake, meant we changed course, and who knows, maybe now there's more of these to come later, right? Or just even the ways we deal with conflict, right? There's so much conflict going on in the world that to me is like boggling my mind, but it really, some of this stuff could really change the geopolitical landscape in ways that I think are thoroughly. So that's something I like about evolution, right? I think that's part of the uniqueness of evolution as a science. Is it's mechanistic, like so many of the other sciences, the physics, the chemistry, in the ways that we like, but it's also a science of history, and it's also a science of chance and randomness, right? And so I think when you understand evolution, like, I don't want to even say more comprehensive, because I think that needs to be more worked into the basics. And I think as we're improving evolution education, we are working that more and more into the basics. Like, but that's probably for people who are going to go through high school biology, in the last 5 or 10 years or going forward, rather than 20, 30 years ago. And so I think that's part of the appreciation that will come from it, is that we really can't really take anything for granted. We're always playing with a live ball, and we could always make the wrong decision, and there might not be any undo button, and I think that people really coming to an understanding, like a deep, deep understanding of that, would, I think, fundamentally change the way people see biology. Yeah.
Right. And this idea of, and sort of the way that people are going, we've seemed to be having tribalism sort of. Do you think that is an evolutionary thing that we constantly fight among ourselves? I could see how that would be beneficial maybe for tribalistic systems in the short term, but I don't see how it's beneficial in the long term. Is that something that has to change, or do you think that's something that sort of is a like what I said, hangover from evolution, like it's just something that's never
Yeah, I
going
mean,
to
I
change.
definitely wouldn't call it a hangover because I definitely think it's part of who we are. And I definitely think that it's part of I think it's complicated, right? But I'll definitely speak to some of the things I think go into the consideration. So um one thing is, yeah, I think there's different levels of, there's like what might be in my best interest versus yours, right? But
Yeah.
we could take that to different groups, be it my neighborhood versus your neighborhood, my group of friends versus your group of friends, my profession versus yours, my country
Right.
versus yours, right? And so all those different levels are places where there could be a lot of conflict. And that conflict might make sense in terms of there's this patch of resources and only one of us can control it type of thing.
Yeah.
There's also a way, though, that conflict is part of cooperation. Like, I think part of what we see, even in the entrenchment of conflict, in other words, people becoming really serious about conflict and saying, nope, I'm not budging on this. Part of that, I think, that is they're actually trying to drive cooperation at higher levels. We're trying to really say, I actually want everybody to be together. But from my perspective, it's really important that if everybody's going to be together, we got to move this way. So
Right.
I seem like I'm at war with those people, and maybe I am, right? Maybe I'm like, these are my opponents, and we're really going at each other, and that's just the way. Like, I'm definitely up, though. It's us and them, and I'm us, and that's them.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it could be, in reality, I'm hoping to change things so that we're all cooperating at a higher level in a different direction. And I'm not saying that that's what all of it is, but
Yeah.
I definitely think that that's part of it, and that's and
Yeah.
both sides see it that way, right? Yeah,
Right, right.
yeah,
But I think that sort of definitely you do have people that are more orientated on, well, what can I do for my people rather than, how would this system be cohesive for everybody and benefit everybody? So a lot of the sort of corporate interests, for instance, they
yes,
they only care about their shareholders and their people, essentially, their group of people,
yes.
whereas more socialized things are saying, well, what's best for everybody in general. So I think that yeah, that really makes sense to me. um
Yeah, there's definitely a
and
way I'd say that the layman understanding of evolution has emphasized so much of that sort of survival of the fittest,
right, right.
that sort of permissiveness to just be selfish to no end, so to speak. And I think to the extent that um, a lot of times even secular organizations or just people that are outside of a religious framework sh- don't have a better understanding of evolution, they can reinforce that, right? And so,
Right.
yeah, I think that's definitely a problem, and people do often overlook how important cooperation at multiple levels is. Even in nature, you see very crazy things where you'll see species of animals that normally have predator prey interactions
Yeah.
actually cooperate with each other when there's a new predator or something out there. Like, yeah, we'll get back to our
Right.
beef later, but right now
Yeah. Yeah.
we've got a common situation we need to deal with. Yeah.
Yeah. And sort of this whole idea that when the herd's strong, the entire herd's strong, then the individuals are strong, is
Yes.
throughout evolution everywhere. And I think that's the biggest sign of somebody not understanding evolution, when they sort of say, hey, but if evolution's true, we should all just be killing each other. And it's sort of like,
Right. Right.
wow, you have completely missed the point, because it's not about survival of the individual necessarily. It's about survival of the group or the species, kind of thing. Um,
Yes. And conflict plays a role in that as well, because there's if you think about sort of signaling, a lot of times fitness is the environment, really. Like a more accurate would be, it's not survival of the fittest in terms of who's the biggest, fastest, strongest. It's survival of the fittest in terms of who has the best fit to the environment, who is the most
yes.
adapted to the conditions. And so one of the things we can do with social pressure is change what's adaptive, right? So like one of our gates is attractiveness, be it attractiveness in the sense of attracting mates, like literally think of sometimes attractiveness, but also just attracting friends, attracting people, attracting a following, attracting resources, attracting opportunities, right? And if somebody is doing something that we don't like or we think is detrimental, part of the reason, we want there to be accountability for something like that is that changes the fit to the environment. If you're if you lie and steal and cheat and we keep promoting you and you get ahead, and then we're creating an environment in which it's good to do those things. But if there are severe consequences for doing those things, such that even if those things were to help you out individually, you were like, I don't want to bear the social consequences. Like if people start calling you a liar, you can't sell nothing. Like, if people think you're cheating them, you ain't gonna have no friends, then we're able to create an environment in which those are the things that are selected for, right? And so there is
negative pressure. Yeah.
So we construct our environment through both positive and negative feedbacks.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I mean, it's interesting that we've sort of, in my opinion, I'd like to comment, we've sort of created a system where sort of, with sort of the late stage capitalism that we're in, that we've created a system where it really doesn't, the main impetus seems to be to create capital, and it doesn't really matter how you do that.
Right.
And I sort of worry about that on human evolutionary terms, like who are we promoting as the people to be successful and have money in our society? Because a lot of the time, the sort of morals of, cooperation seem to be dumped for whoever's prepared to be Machiavellian enough to get the money, basically. Do you have any thoughts on that, like whether we are creating a system that will hamper us in the long term?
I mean, I definitely think we are. I definitely don't think that the system is what's best for the species. I just think we're at a time now where I think we have the data, and I also think we can think in a sense biologically, right? I think sometimes we think of ourselves in a way where we extract our needs, in a sense. We say, oh, I need money for food, I need money for this, I need money for that. In reality, we should see that as like our material conditions. Like we're a species. Like, of course, we need food and we need shelter and we need clothing and things like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so I think if we started to ask ourselves, how do we get the best material living conditions for the most amount of people, we now know enough to know that this isn't it, right? And so the question then becomes, what are we going to do about it? And this is where I often feel like people don't recognize one of the limits of science. If we really made public policy based on the data we have, we would live in a whole different world. And I'm not here to suggest it would be some kind of utopia, but I think it'd be a lot better. We have way more data than we need on so many really important issues. We don't have the politics we need. We don't have the right leadership in place. We don't have the right policies. We don't have enough support for the right policies, right? We don't have enough agency for the average person, right? The average person has a certain moral compass and a certain, what they think is acceptable and unacceptable. But if you look at what our nations are doing or our employers are doing and things like that, it's totally out of step with most of us as individuals. And that's sort of like, again, there's a system where we lack the autonomy. We could all say, yeah, wouldn't it be better if we raised the minimum wage? And there's thousands of us compared to the dozens of managers. But if those dozens of managers are more effective at lobbying and getting politicians elected than we are, then we're not going to get better material living
Yeah,
conditions.
yeah,
And it doesn't matter how much data we produce that tells us X or Y would be better. And I think that, and again, from my perspective, that was one of the wake up calls during the pandemic. Not to keep going back to that, but that's what it was for me. It was like, holy
right.
crap, we have the data and we generated the solution in
Yeah,
real time. Then we studied it faster than we've ever been able to study the effect of something.
right,
And it just
right.
didn't matter. It didn't matter how much data we had. And that was really one of those times where I just said, this is the limit of science. Science can produce
Well,
all the data, but it can't make you. It can lead the horse to water, but it can't make him drink.
right, right, right. But I think, um, and I totally agree. I totally agree. It didn't have for some people. It didn't matter how much data that you presented, but like I do have to believe it. I know that that data saved lives. It
Sure, sure,
absolutely
yeah, yeah, yeah.
the amount that we poured into getting the vaccines up and running, it definitely saved lives, and we can study that and see it. So I don't, I don't see it as in vain, but I totally agree.
Yeah, no,
Like
it's just
some
a
people,
limitation. It's not that it's in vain. It's just that
yeah,
there's
yeah.
more to it. There's more that we have to do than just get the data. We have to do more than just the studies.
Yeah, and so we run into these things, and in our world we have, like the young Earth creationists, and we both encountered, Donnie and crew, and Hovind and crew,
Sure,
and
sure.
so, um, what do you do about, like, how do you get them to understand the insane amount of evidence for evolution? How do you get through to someone like that?
It's,
I
it's
don't know.
tough.
It's rough. And well, what do you think is the best argument for evolution, or the best evidence, basically? What can we, what's the best thing to throw out there in your opinion?
I don't know. Honestly, I a lot of times I think we're so far beyond that. Um,
Sure.
and it's a really weird thing, especially thinking about it in the classroom and getting to sort of compare that to thinking about the research and then thinking about like what happens like in YouTube and stuff like that. And I don't want to offend people when I say this, but it really feels like both sides don't require a lot of information. Um, there's sort of a way in which the people that are committed to like a creationist position, I think for most people it's pretty obvious that they're not serious about the science, or they're not going, that they have some
Yeah.
other commitment they've made first that's sort of driving that stance, right? But I find that on the other side, it's also a pretty easy thing. Once a person, you know, doesn't have super conspiratorial thinking about scientists, and once they sort of accept the validity of the scientific method, it doesn't take a lot for them to accept evolution. And matter of fact, most people I don't think even have to have a very high understanding of it. Like I accept gravity.
Yeah. Yeah.
I let go of stuff, it drops, and scientists tell me that that's gravity. I can't tell you what the formula is. I
Mhm.
can't do the calculations. I don't even know what the factors go into the formula. But for most of us, once we have nothing blocking us from accepting the scientific consensus, we just accept the scientific consensus. So even like when we teach details, and sometimes we argue the validity of those details. So we'll argue, for instance, that if you're going to med school, you should really understand evolution because it'll make you a better doctor, right? And we could even
Mhm.
argue that it helps you understand maybe public policy, right? But all these things, we're trying to maybe get you interested, and then there's so much to learn. But you're sort of beyond acceptance at that point, if it makes any sense. Right?
Right.
Like we're not trying to get you to accept it. We're just trying to get you to
Yeah.
understand how proteins are made, right? Like,
Basics. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, and so I don't know what's the argument or piece of evidence that makes a difference, or if there even is
Right.
an argument or a piece of evidence that makes the difference. So much as there's seems to be something else that that determines maybe more up river or up the chain before we get to
Mhm.
the argument and evidence, whether how you even feel about the different sides of it.
So you think that the best way maybe is to address their distrust of the scientific world and the things being
In
presented to
some sense, yes. Actually, when I do, have time to think deeply about this, and I can't say that it doesn't happen, because it does,
right.
because I'm particularly interested in the acceptance of evolution and other things like that. But yeah, that
Yeah.
is often what I think. I think the words I use is that there's really a problem of authority, right? They've trusted ministers and leaders and people who they really take seriously, who most of us would say aren't qualified, don't know what they're talking about, and a lot of times are just outright lying to them, right? And
Mm.
then there's these other people who, have done the work and have the training, and they've produced, again,
Yeah.
like, a lot of evidence, and they just don't buy it. They don't
Mm.
take those people's efforts even seriously, or to be well intentioned. And so that
Mm.
seems to be the bigger problem. Like, I could teach you anything. I could teach you everything out of a biology textbook, but if you come into the classroom and you think I have an agenda, and that I'm evil,
Right.
and that everything that I put in this book was also written by people with a similar evil agenda, it doesn't matter how good the information in the book
Right.
is,
Right. And it
right?
doesn't
Like,
matter how good a teacher you
and it
are.
doesn't matter how good of a
Yeah.
teacher I am.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's actually, definitely what's happening a lot, and it's really unfortunate.
Is it to do with sort of a lot of the time? I think that those people they all of their needs, and I've sort of recently I've been reading up against about sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and how that sort of
Mm,
psychologically we need certain things to be well humans, like safety and security, and like the ones you mentioned, food and water and stuff. But what I've sort of played with recently is a lot of these things of safety and things, they do come from their congregation or their religious group kind of thing, that need for acceptance, that need for self-actualization, for instance, that
mm,
they think the best
mm.
version of themselves is coming from this group. um, and so I think that they think that's the only place they're going to get it from. And I'm not entirely convinced that's the case. I think you can, with any social group, have acceptance and safety and security, and that self-actualization of becoming the best person that you possibly can be. Um, so I'm not sure, but I think that maybe it has to be pointed out sort of how much science has done for humanity, as opposed to, say, religions, for instance.
Sure.
And so where I wanted to go with this, sorry, I'm very
No, no, you're fine.
meandering this morning, is sort of going forward, like what can we point to with evolution that has, or just evolutionary theory that's sort of done things for us, or benefit us in a way that can be tangible to the people that are like, well, evolution's just a, you know, this fuzzy concept that they teach that doesn't mean anything. Is there anything that we can point to that is like, well, here is a tangible thing that studying the theory has either gained us knowledge of, or somehow we've implemented in some way to provide a benefit for society?
Yeah, I think, you know, what we teach people now is that evolution is the core of all of modern biology. And that's not like hyperbole, that's the literal language we use. Evolution is the core of modern biology. So in a sense, we teach students that it's at the base, and everything in biology springs from that. So if you think, like, understand, if you think the sweet smell of flowers is great, well, it takes evolution to understand where those smells come from, how those smells are related to other things, how that smell interacts with pollinators or whatever, right? Like all of those things. I like tangible things like vaccines. We had to sequence the genomes and understand the evolutionary relationships to make even just the profoundness of animal testing. To be honest, it's kind of an area that can get ugly, and you definitely have to be careful with the ethics when you're dealing with animals, right? But our ability to like think we have a revolutionary treatment to a serious disease, recognize that something like a mouse shares enough of our biochemistry and lived reality on this planet, that they have the same ailments. And so then we can like test the drugs and stuff in these animal models, oftentimes perfect them or get them a lot better, right? Get them a lot closer to prime time, and then safely transfer them to humans, and they work. That's crazy. And if it wasn't for understanding evolutionary relationships, that would not be possible. We'd not be able to use this other species as a model for and have it work like that. That's insane.
The argument I've heard against that is, well, God created the mice to be similar so we could have something to test on, kind of thing, which seems really, really wacky. But if that's the case, and this is my thought, if that's the case, then why didn't he make it work on a mouse exactly the same as a human? Like, why stop at mice have certain limitations, and then we go to human trials because mice aren't humans, and there can be some different interactions of these things on a rodent as opposed to a Homo sapiens. So if that was the case, why didn't he make them exactly the same effect?
Yeah, it's strange. It's a sort of a theistic evolutionary position, right? That God did it, and this is God's. And I find it to be at once the most impressive and unimpressive explanation of things. And so I want to be fair. Like, I was impressed with it when I was a Christian. When I was a Christian, I went to Catholic school. We were kind of taught theology in theology class. We were actually taught that like Genesis and all that stuff was a creation narrative. We were taught that this is our traditional creation myth. What you learn in biology, that's the natural history of what actually went down. And so they don't quite tell you, but when you read between the lines, it's like, this is the story, and then the theology is the story, the biology is how God did it, right? And so I accepted that. I used to, my principal thing I would tell people right off the bat, if you asked me about my theology when I was a Christian, I would say God works through natural means. And if you ask me what that means, I would say, if you get into a car accident and your car flips over 32 times and falls off the side of a mountain and you just land unharmed, most people think that's like some miraculous thing, but I would say, no, we can probably explain that through the physics and the and the force and you just got really, really lucky. And that you getting lucky is that's God. Right. And once I sort of matured in my scientific thinking, I came to this realization that I was effectively saying that God worked as though God doesn't work.
Right.
Right. The way God does things is to hide everything that he's doing. And I realized that I called it the mundane God. So like, what is the point? How, right? It lacks the, to me, God is a supernatural thing. And so if it's just reduced to the natural processes.
So theistic God, which just, started the engine, and the engine was all, set things, and then it just ran, and that God literally does nothing at all. It doesn't interact with the world in any way because, and I don't even know where to go to sort of falsify or at least, confirm something like that, because literally anything that happens, like, well, that's, Yeah, no, I like that, the sort of mundane good.
I okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you brought up something I thought was really important. You were talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and
Yes.
to sort of be charitable to people that have religious commitments to ideas I don't agree with. I think that's largely what's going on. Is when I try to put it bluntly, it's sort of people are unwilling to risk their supernatural destiny based on your scientific theory. And so they see this thing over here as like this inconvenient idea, like who knows? Yeah, maybe it explains stuff, maybe it doesn't. But over here is God and their sense of belonging, their sense of they're going to be with their, and I don't know that that's something, Dylan Huntington said they weren't argued into it, so it's hard to argue them out of it. I think there's a lot of truth to that. There's a lot of, and one of the consequences, and this is what's been keeping me up at night lately, is the idea that might genuinely create a difference in what's in our best interest or what we see our interest as. I think a lot of times we want to see people that think differently as that, oh, they're just misguided. At the end of the day, we all want what's best for everybody, and we all want to do what's going to lead to the thriving for the most of. And I don't know that. I don't know that, because if you want something else, if this other thing is more important to you, if the God and doing it God's way is really at the end of the day what's most important to you, if doing things the way your church is going to approve of is really, then that's going to motivate you to do things. And I don't have the counter to that. And I don't know that. And I definitely don't think that with everybody. I don't think that's something you can just put out there and know of a person ahead of time. But I guess what I'm saying is I think there's this continuum of you and I would really want to come to a mutual, we do have the same end goal, but we differ in how we think we should get there, versus we genuinely have different goals because we genuinely have different motivations.
Well, one of the things that's sort of been, disturbing me, and I can totally see where you're coming from there, is the idea that there is a bunch of people that are actively looking forward to the end of the world, that want the world to end. And that's the big thing for me, that how do you come to well, we're all doing the best thing if they actively want our society and our civilization to end in some apocalyptic
Yeah.
ending. And it sort of is, well, as long as they're not actively working towards it. But you do have to ask, are there actions that are people taking? Like, for instance, are people supporting Israel in what they're doing to the Palestinians right now? Because Israel, is supposed to be the they have to rebuild the second temple, and they have to implement all of these things. So sort of this idea of, well, we want these outcomes, and if the outcome is destruction of the material civilization that we have built, like that will not align with what I believe. It will not.
Right.
I
think that's a perfect example.
Yeah.
It's one of the ones I had in mind. Yeah, I think that's it's a really tough thing to deal with, especially because so many of let's say like the Americans that are taking that side of things, or and doing so from a high level, they'll tell you that. They will say, I support this, and I do so because my Bible tells me this, and I want that, right? Or like I was telling a friend of mine, I went to visit the State House in Michigan, and my friend took me into the Speaker of the House's office, and they had an Israeli flag next to the American flag. And that just boggled my mind, because you're like, this is the capital of the state of Michigan in the United States of America. Why would you fly? That's just crazy. It just seemed like, wow, like they're really deeply committed to this, right? And And you're just like, I can't get with that. And then, yeah, there's a number of other examples, right? Of how we're having to try to cooperate with people who don't necessarily share our vision of what we're working towards.
Well, I mean, it's not. It's definitely not all Christians. Or
No,
you know,
no, no,
most
no,
Christians are sort
no,
of like,
no.
you know, it will happen, but we want to work towards it like it's not. And it's like, okay, well, I can get on board with that as long as you are on board with the science and as long as you're on board with preserving civilization. But really, we're talking about a certain segment that kind of are not. You know, they really are looking forward to this end of the world and are actively trying to make it happen, as far as I can see, and it's sort of very horrifying.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
well, good.
well, I just, wanted to ask, like, is that something that in your church was a big thing? Like the look at, because Catholicism usually doesn't go for that kind of thing. Sort of
Yeah,
the
I always had a weird. Let me explain a little bit about my upbringing. I went to Catholic schools and was very serious about theology, and in that sense, was more Catholic than a lot of Catholics, right? Because in
yeah,
America, a lot of people go to Catholic school. They just do so because they're in the parish or whatever, and they don't
yeah,
actually.
yeah,
They're not very
yeah,
religious.
and they have
Um,
good schools.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Um, my mom and I went to a non-denominational church. So I grew up worshiping and attending a non-denominational church. My dad went to a Methodist church. My grandparents are Pentecostal ministers. So there was a lot of different flavors of Christianity
right.
around me growing up. Um, and that's and what and this is something that's been weird too is, you know, I also grew up around like a lot of white Christians, but also a lot of black Christians, and there's definitely like a big difference. And it seems like a lot of black Christians that I know, they're not into the idea of wanting to bring about the end of the world and things like that.
Hmm.
But there's a way in which they endorse a lot of biblical literacy because there's like an identity. Christianity is a huge identity marker, and part of that identity marker is like, I believe in the Bible. They may not read the Bible, they may not know what's in the Bible, and to be honest, most of their theology comes from gospel music.
Right.
but they believe what's in the Bible. And so I think part of the problem we have is it's hard for us to figure out who that small I would say small, who that problematic group is, because we have so many people that don't share their ideas, but like cosplay it, if that makes any
Yeah,
sense.
yeah, yeah.
And it gets really hard. But we definitely should be fair about the fact that they're definitely not all the same. It's just tough because a lot of them go along with the rhetoric, even if they're not as enthusiastic about the consequences of that rhetoric.
And you did a an amazing video. I might actually link it if I can find it. I should be able to find it, about the identity of the African American culture and religion. And I sort of, I reached out to you after I saw it because, it might not surprise you. I don't have a lot of understanding of African American culture just because of, what I've been raised in. This is something that I don't see a lot of.
Sure,
But it
sure.
was it was really eye opening, sort of you talking about the embrace of sort of quite possibly what is a really oppressive system to the black people, and sort of defending it to the hilt, even though it is oppressive and it does take tithing and it does take their money, and
Yes.
it isn't a great system. And I wanted to ask you, sort of, I really want to say, and I'm trying to be
No,
delicate,
it's
but
okay. It's okay.
what?
We're friends. I'm,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not gonna
yeah.
jump on you.
No, I'm really curious, and sometimes I can upset people, but it is an honest curiosity of why black people defend Christianity like really zealously. Like you see, these people, and don't get me wrong, there's white people that do the same, but a lot of black
Sure.
people are really zealous about defending Christianity, and it's never made sense to me, considering sort of the role Christianity has played in that sort of oppression of them, or at least if not oppression, then segregation, because as you pointed out, that black churches are different than white churches, and there is a lot of sort of segregation of people between these two sort of
Yes, yes.
flavors of Christianity, and that's possibly something I didn't really think about until I saw your video.
Oh, I appreciate
But
that because we wonder sometimes, but
no,
no, I'm glad we did it. Yeah.
yeah, and I wanted to sort of talk to you about um, like why there is this segregation, and are these churches accepting of black people, or is it are black people still treated as sort of, well, you've got your own Christianity kind of thing, and we're going to keep apart? How much does that play into the
I think
the, the
there's
social fabric?
I think there's both. I think there's a lot going on. So one, I think if I'm being honest, I think if people don't live in the States, they're probably be very surprised how segregated it is. Um, you know, because Americans sometimes talk about slavery and segregation and those things as though they're things that are way in our past. And now we're this melting pot, and no matter where you move in the United States, it's just going to be this rainbow coalition of people everywhere.
Right,
It's
right.
not like that. America has insert ethnicity neighborhoods, white neighborhoods, black neighborhoods, Hispanic neighborhoods, Mexican neighborhoods, on and on and on. And, like, and that's not to say we don't have any integration or any diverse communities. Again, I'm just trying to speak in the aggregate. It would surprise you how segregated we are, right? There's some stat that maybe 70% or some like American white folks don't know any people of color, right? Because it's not uncommon, because part of that's the economic segregation, right? And the gentrification, right? Like, when we had things like where we had pretty diverse cities, a lot of times maybe there was like race riots, right? All the white folks left, went to the suburbs, left behind people of color. So people of color like disproportionately concentrated in a lot of urban environments. And so part of what you got to understand is like sometimes a lot of people live segregated lives. It's not just church, right? It's their school or workplace is predominantly one or the other. Their friend group is predominantly one or the other. And so then Sunday's a reflection of that. Then on top of that, you have differences in the style. So a lot of times black churches, especially the more traditional stereotypical black churches, have more of the big choirs and the big all and out gospel bands, and they maybe they got the speaking in tongues and the laying on of hands and people just falling out, and a lot of that stuff is really just very Pentecostal or like a certain type of Baptist or whatever. But those denominational differences get layered on top of cultural traditions because people are more likely to be one or the other. And so you do sometimes go to white churches and you'll hear them talk in a derogatory fashion about charismatic movements or charismatic churches. In other words, they think all that hoopling, hollering, running around, having a rock concert is not really worship. It's not really focusing on God. It's not, so there's a lot of they're not doing it right over there type of attitude. And then for a lot of us, you go to white church and you're like, oh my goodness, this is boring. And the music makes me want to jump out of a window. So there's just a lot of those kind of differences. But as far as why black people defend it, it's this weird inheritance that we have with Christianity. First off, I think a lot of people have put out of their mind the fact that it was kind of forced on us in our enslavement. We don't really talk about that much, so most people don't think about that. But a lot of black people really do see the church as essential to the civil rights struggle. They read Black history into the Bible. I don't know. You might have to go check with some of your other Black friends, see if they're willing to co-sign on this idea for me. But trust me, that's what's going on. When they read the stories about, right, I'll give you a perfect example.
Okay.
My uncle's name, Moses. My grandfather, who's a bishop, Moses. His father, who's also a bishop, Moses. Do you see what I'm saying? Why would you name all these Black people Moses? Because when they see that, Moses went and challenged Pharaoh to let my people go and all that, they read in American Black struggle into the Bible, right? And so the Bible becomes a story of how Jesus really wanted to set us free and da 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 da. There's also a way in which people have been left destitute. The entire history of Black people in this country has always been the bottom of the social ladder. First with slavery, then with segregation, now with the new Jim Crow and systematic racism or whatever. Even if it gets better, we're still at the bottom. And so
voter suppression,
and so people don't have agency. They don't feel power. So that idea of a celestial father who could never be a deadbeat or abusive parent, and even though, again, the book says something different, but that's what they read into the book, right? And the idea that our lives might be rough. We might not have a lot. We might not be able to afford to go on luxury vacations and have summer homes and all of this stuff, but there's a mansion in the sky waiting for us for soldiering on. So it definitely gets built a lot into people's sense of resilience, people's sense of community, people's sense of strength. Also, go ahead.
I totally understand that, but a lot of that seems like sort of coping with the intense struggles, and I don't mean coping as in negative, like kind
sure.
of thing.
No, that's how I would describe it. Yeah, no, I think that's accurate.
People have coping mechanisms. We all have things that we do when we are in a bad place and we need to cope with something, and that may vary from person to person. You might whack away on the drums. I might sort of isolate myself and play a game or something like,
right.
We all have these coping mechanisms. So it sounds like that's sort of a coping to the vast inequities that have been forced upon a people to say, well, it's going to be fair in the end, and sort of it to me that's kind of horrific, that you're sort of promising.
It is.
Well, after you, I know it's not fair now, but after you die, it's all going to be fair. I find that, why can't we just make it fair now?
And that's the struggle for Black atheists. The struggle for Black atheists is you love your people. You don't want to take anything from them that's helping them get by. But at the same time, after all we've been through, the very last thing we need is false hope. The very last thing we need is absentee promises. The very last thing we need is, this thing that, and so that's why it's really tough. I wanted to throw a couple other things on there.
Sure.
One is Black folks take the religion very seriously, and as a result, they take the culture with it very seriously. So, for instance, my dad, who I don't think is religious at all, has this image in his house, in his bathroom. I hate it, and it's like a Bible with a gun sitting on top of it, and there's like a quote beneath it or something that says like "the choice is yours" or something like that. But it infers that like you can choose that street life and thug it out, right? The gun, or you could be a good Black person and be a man of God, right? And again, I don't think my dad is even religious. It's probably just somebody gave him and he put up. Right. But there's this very much this way in which when we talk about the problems in Black communities and people talk about crime and violence and gangs and drugs and prostitution and on and on and on, all the demons, to stay away from the Black community, all these things are going to eat you up. Black people have internalized that the way to not have those things take over your life, the way to resist those things is religion.
Right.
And so people very much associate their religiosity with why they're not in the streets or why they haven't fallen victim to these things. And so that's very much part of it's toxic as hell, but that's very much in our cultural narrative. And I hate to say this too, like class gets piled on top of that. So
Mhm.
a lot of times you have like upwardly mobile black people who are super religious Christian. Maybe there's some discipline and stuff in there. They get educated, whatever.
Mhm.
And there's upward mobility. Then there's like they look down upon like kind of hood or like ghetto black people that are caught up in the riffraff, maybe running the streets and stuff like that, right? And
Mhm.
so being blessed kind of comes with it. Like there's a certain degree to which those lifestyle changes are associated with upward mobility. And so being clean, living a good life, there's benefits, there's social praises and all this stuff that come with those things. And it adds this extra layer, right? There's this extra layer of to be a good, that's why I brought up that image. That's the image
Right.
in most people's minds. It's either you choosing the gun and the gangs and the drugs or you choose the Bible, right? And
Right.
there's no in between, right? That's just the dichotomy that a lot of us are raised with. It's either the street or the church. Um, and then a lot of anti-blackness gets built into that. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's obviously a false dichotomy because we know plenty of black people that are good people that are atheists. We've met them all. We've
Yes.
interacted with them. It's
Yes.
yeah, that's a horrible. Um, do you think that's by design to keep people in religion? Like if you leave religion, you're going to go to the streets. Do you think that's by design, or do you think that's just a consequence of a product of the culture?
I kind of think it's a combination. I think it's a thing people have lived, right? There's people who will tell you, I know preachers who used to be gangbangers.
Yeah.
That story's very attractive. Like it's very difficult to deny somebody who says, I was out running the streets, doing this and that. I did time in prison, da 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 da. But I met some good people. They turned my life around. I left the drugs alone. I married a good woman. Now I'm a leader in the community. All this type of stuff. So those
Yeah.
narratives are very powerful to people, um, and I think there's a sense of superiority that comes with a lot of it because again, you're sort of denigrating the street life and you're denigrating all of those things. A lot of times you're denigrating things like, unfortunately, like the LGBT community and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's a sense of chest beating that a lot of Christians do. There's a lot of pride. Also, a lot of people, they don't have a lot else. They might not feel super accomplished in their work. They might not feel super talented or special in any way, but a lot of times, just being a nice Christian who celebrates your godly identity, you get a lot of friends, people invite you to things, everybody's like, oh, that's brother so and so, that's a great guy, great guy. Oh, he's awesome. We invite him to everything. He can come anywhere he wants to, you know. And so there's that sense of real specialness and elevation that being a Christian gives people. And I think the notion that that might be wrong, that they could have been wrong about those things, that's tough. It's just a tough pill to swallow. And that's just what I mean why there's so much else that these are all needs that to a lot of people supersede scientific theories or scientific evidence, especially if science isn't a big part of your life to begin with.
Yeah. But I think I worry about that kind of shaming of people that are sort of gang banging or whatever. Like, I really worry about that. That you aren't going to improve their situation by just you know treating them like there's no hope, or the only hope they have is religion, kind of thing. That they're
Yes,
they're
yes.
forever condemned unless they accept God, kind of stuff. I feel like there's a lot better ways to address things like that. But and I mean the massive problems that exist, and The massive problems of how they're treated by society in general really do worry me. The prison system of the US absolutely concerns me. It seems to rely on people going to jail in order to provide a cheap labor force. It's not right. It's horrible. There's so many things that really do concern me about that. But things like, well, if you're in prison and you're religious, you get a better chance of being let out because
Yes,
everyone
yes,
knows that Christians are good, and
yes.
it's that sort of mentality that really worries me.
But that's a
That
perfect example, right? Because
right,
this is again the interaction of the upward mobility or something like that. Like if you are
right,
to
right,
go through a parole hearing, one of the things
mm,
that Christianity does teach people is that they're supposed to be apologetic, they're supposed to be humble, they're supposed to be ashamed of their sin. And so
mm,
from the perspective of the parole board, if you have somebody who's like, I've changed my ways, I've totally turned my life around, I feel terrible about the things that I did, I'm so sorry, it's like you're more likely to seem like a favorable candidate for release. Not that you can't say all those things from a non-religious perspective, but like you said, it's just
right.
kind of built into the expectations of the faithful, and it just becomes much easier for people to accept that from them, I would say. Yeah.
Well, I think that it's a false expectation, because I think that a lot of the time Christianity gives people license to do things wrong, with the expectation that if you do that, you're just going to be forgiven, and you don't actually have to make amends or do anything else for it. All you have to do is sort of to be sorry. And I think that actually doesn't that contribute to like a lot of recidivism, for instance,
To
of
be
re
honest, there's a element of religiosity, and I kind of see this in all people, but I do especially see it in people of color, where that almost seems to be the core of their theology. Like
Hmm,
they're maybe not even religious, they're maybe not even the type to read the Bible or even pray, but there's a Jay-Z lyric that says we're gonna sin a lot and pray to Christ forgive us.
right.
But there's like a only God can judge me is the core of their theology. And their
Okay.
idea is that people don't even understand what they've had to deal with in the world. Maybe what they've had to do just to get by. Maybe they've had to do some stuff that other people would
Right.
automatically think they're a terrible person. So to them, they've encapsulated them, "Oh, no, only God can judge me. I've done what I had to do. I've done what I needed to do. And maybe only God can understand that." Right. And so
Mm,
this is a person literally, they don't never pray, they don't never go to church, they ain't never gonna catch them listening to gospel music, no, none of that. But that idea is important to them, again, as a coping mechanism,
mm,
probably to sleep at night.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I did have one other question and again, I'm really curious, and I don't mean offense to anybody. What I was thinking of last night is the way that we define, and so this ties into evolution as well. Like, why do we define race the way that we do? Like, it to me, I mostly see it as just a social construct and a product of culture. Like, there's almost no difference between you and me, Jay, sort of genetically, kind of thing.
Sure,
We're
sure.
almost, there's more variation within, say, Australians than there is between you and me.
Right,
It's sort of,
right.
and what I sort of wondered is, why do we sort of go, well, that person's white, and if they have, say, a white father and a black mother, for instance, they're black instead of white. Why is that this? And I was thinking about it, and it seems like to me that there's this purity idea that you are white until you get a tiny drop of black, and then you're black, kind of thing, and you can never be white
Well, yeah,
again.
so we the issue is really racism, right? It's racism
Right.
that forms the problem. So when you talk about there's more variation within a population than between populations, that's why we say race is a social construct. But the issue has
Yeah.
been racism, and the need to create hierarchies that black people are at the bottom of. And once you do that, then blackness is associated with You just don't want it. And there really were purity laws in this country. Some of the not one drop rule, right? Before we did all this genetic testing, but the idea was like, if you had even a drop of Negro blood, then you were no longer, exactly like you said, you were no longer pure. And there's just, unfortunately, there's still a lot of that. And because we've treated people so differently, because we've segregated our communities, because we've segregated our workplaces, people don't even really take this into consideration, but we need affirmative action laws. Like if you leave at least American corporations alone, they will hire a board and a leadership, and it will be all white men. It will just be all. Yes. They don't think nothing of it. They literally have to be forced by law to go, how many women do we have to have in here?
Yeah.
Okay, how many people of color do we have to have in here so we don't get a SEC violation, or we don't get the feds up our butts, or we don't lose access to these grants over here, or we don't get sued by our employees, or whatever it is. And they literally will do the least amount possible, right? And so it's just built into our stuff. And also, like I said, remember the way I said that people, like there's neighborhoods in America, it's this ethnicity neighborhood, that, and that.
Yeah.
It's also built into how we think. Like the way we tell stories is, I got cut off by this Asian lady on the way to work. Then this stupid white lady in the store wanted to see the manager. Like, in other words, we just see color everywhere. Every story we tell, we mention the race of the person, whether it's relevant or not. It's just become this thing. Like, it's in the air. Like when you're in America, the air is just thick with racially charged energy everywhere you go. And the only time I think it's not is when you're in a segregated community. If you're the only time the air is not thick with racial energy is there's all white people or it's all black people. And I think a lot of times, even that is a barrier to our successful integration, is where we're not as comfortable as we need to be with those early moments. Like one of the things that I have to deal with a lot is I'm the only black person in all white spaces. I grew up the only black kid in all white schools. The only black grad student in my department. I'll probably be the only black faculty member, wherever I get a job. And there's a certain degree of comfort you have to have with being integration. Not people talking integration, but my life is integration. People are going to say awkward things. There's going to be awkward moments. There's going to be little moments of culture clash. There's going to be times that the actual policies have to get renegotiated because they ain't never have nobody even mention the stuff that all of a sudden you mention, right? Because there'll be things like, look, you got to think about these things. And I'm like, oh yeah, we should think about those things. And there's a way we just have to get comfortable with that. And a lot of us are not, because we've never had to deal with it. And now think about this too. Now we're already segregated, and now they're like, they want to remove, like there's so many school districts in so many states where they're taking away even the books. So you already don't know any black kids. You already don't know any LGBTQ kids. Now they're making it so you can't even read about them.
Yeah. They pretend they don't exist. So when you actually meet somebody, I worry that they're intrinsically going to think there's something wrong about them when, because that's all that they get at home. It's really uncomfortable and really unsettling. Do you find an impulse to act differently in these all white spaces? Do you feel,
we call it code switching. Yeah, there's definitely you definitely feel the need to change a lot. That's one of the extra burdens we feel. So like, let's say sometimes you pay us and like a white guy the same thing, you might be undercompensating me because I have this extra burden, I have this extra cost. I have to dress differently, I have to talk differently. I may have to commute further if I want to like live amongst my people and eat my foods, right? I may have to, and there's this extra cost you pay of setting aside all of those cultural markers to fit in. to your workplace, and the consequences of not doing so. And that's a real thing we struggle with, and we find allies in there are institutions that are getting better. So, for instance, a lot of institutions are realizing that diversity really requires culture change,
Yeah.
such that we create an inclusive culture that respects and accepts differences rather than just increasing representation, but demanding that everybody assimilate to the dominant culture.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think that diversity is so it's such a strengthening force to have different ideas and different, people think about different things different ways from the cultures that they come from. And I think that having people think differently is always, sort of talking from a business point of view, is always really powerful, because when you are looking for innovation, um, having everybody just think the same, it's death for innovation. It's absolute death for innovation. You need people to be able to come from different cultures, come from different places. I mean, look at India. They just landed something on the moon that was incredibly cheap by all standards. They revolutionized space travel in that way because of the way that they think about how to do things. And I think it's amazing. Because space travel is incredibly expensive, and
Right.
like reducing the cost. But then you have an Elon Musk, he's an absolute pillock, but he did revolutionize, things like reusing rockets and stuff like,
Sure,
different
sure,
people from different backgrounds
sure,
looking
sure.
at the same thing. I think that, from my point of view, I think that this world, we're going to need everybody from every background working together in order to overcome the problems that we're facing. I mean, they're so huge. Why would we sort of put a whole group of people down here and ignore them when, we need them? Well, we absolutely need everybody, and I don't understand it. It seems crazy to me.
Yeah, I think a lot of
Um,
it is the narrative that they have in their heads is that you have some qualified white kid and he doesn't get into the school because there's some undeserving student of color, who's a C or
yeah,
D student, and they get taken instead, just to fill the diversity quota. When in reality, it's they're perfectly well qualified students that have been
yeah,
excluded just because they're not of a certain demographic. And what we're trying to do now is make space that they feel welcome to. Um, and
yeah,
again, that's how, and we should see that as a strength, and we should also see it as a strength that people have overcome those challenges. So in biology, one of those things we talk about is the handicap principle. And so just imagine two people about the same size, same height, same whatevers. They run a race, say it's a 100-meter dash, and they
mhm,
finish with the same exact time. So for the most
right,
of us, we would be equally impressed. We say they had an equally impressive
sure,
performance. They ran the
sure,
same distance in the same amount of time. Now, if I told you one of them actually had a backpack on with a 50-pound weight in it, now all of a sudden you're probably a little bit more impressed with the person, even though they ran the same time. But the person who
yeah,
had the 50-pound weight on their back, that's impressive, right? Because they were carrying this extra burden. And that's what sometimes gets missed in the conversation about diversity, is that a lot of times, people come from marginalized populations or groups.
yeah,
They're in, they're just as qualified, and they overcame a physical disability, or they overcame, coming from a different part of
mhm,
the world, and English is actually their second language, but they still write just as well as all the other
yeah.
students, right? And we should be going, wow, that's actually impressive, and we just, unfortunately, people have been taught to demonize diversity rather than to celebrate it.
I don't know, the area that I live in, that I like it. There's, sort of a lot of people from India, originally around, and a lot of people from Africa. Like, there's just tons of different people, and I don't I don't see the problem, and I really like it. I mean, there's such, you get Asian restaurants because there's a lot of Chinese people around the area,
Sure,
and you get,
sure.
all of these different cultures. You get Indian restaurants, and just, you know I mean, I know I'm sort of making it shallow, but in that way, it's sort of I like the melding of cultures because it's just it makes things more vibrant and you know more varied. Like I don't understand why I would want to go to the white bread sandwich bar every single day.
Yeah,
Like that
yeah,
seems crazy. Yes, and people that sort of say, oh well, sort of the melting pot can't work. I think that there's a number of countries around that have absolutely proved that wrong. There's multiple people, and that's not to say there isn't stuff to work on. Absolutely, especially as far as our native Australian populations have been absolutely done
yeah. We deal
dirty
the
in
same
a
thing
major
here.
way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But I hope that sort of everybody can work together for the betterment of all humanity. Would you consider yourself a sort of a humanist, or what would you say that your
Yeah,
sort
I
of
mean, I like to.
moral
Yeah,
stance is?
I like to think I'm a secular humanist. Although I don't, I don't know. I don't know always know what the commitments are. But yeah,
Yeah,
no. Generally speaking, I think of myself as a secular
yeah.
humanist. Yeah.
No, if you haven't read the Humanist Manifesto, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have
Yeah.
to boot you out.
Yeah.
No, no, that's totally fine. No, I get you. Where do you think that morals come from? Just vaguely, sort of. Where do you gain it? Where do you get your morals from?
I
Where do you
think
get what you ought to do?
I think they're weird. I think they're a combination of an inward sense of right and wrong that can develop a number of different ways, and I think they're negotiated. I think, I think if you get into a monogamous relationship with someone and you're sleeping around, that's immoral because
Right,
you negotiated an agreement with somebody and you violated that agreement. And it's okay to change your mind, but to me, it would have been ethical if you then renegotiated your commitment once that
right,
was no longer working for you. But if you're in an open relationship or a non-committed relationship, that's perfectly fine because that's what you've agreed to. Knock yourselves out. I don't think all cases of morality work that way, but I do think that's largely part of it. We've largely said it's wrong to kill people. We've also largely negotiated an exception for war, an exception for police sometimes stopping dangerous criminals, an exception
yes,
for defending your person or
yeah,
your
yep,
home. Those were all negotiated. We
yeah,
could change our mind, right? There's some places where police are not allowed to have guns, and it's really not okay for them to kill people. It's just they've
yeah.
negotiated different rules around those things. There are places that don't keep standing armies. So all of those things are, and who's a soldier and who's a terrorist, right? That again, that seems to be
Yeah.
largely negotiated. It doesn't seem to be based on an absolute standard of if you do X,
Right.
then Y.
Well,
Um,
it's
s-
interesting that one person's freedom fighter is the other person's terrorist kind of thing. Like they
yeah,
are essentially the same thing when you look at it, but it depends on your perspective of whether they are fighting for what you believe in or fighting for what you don't believe in.
yeah, and I'm kind of okay with that. Like in a weird sense, I do understand that sometimes I think for religious people, the idea that their morality is grounded in God is incredibly important to them, and that does the whole
Mm,
objective da 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 da. But for me, I just want to. I want the world to improve along the axis that I think are important, and I understand I need to try to like get people over to my way of thinking. Like this is just the way it is to me, and so it doesn't cause me a lot of angst that I don't. I don't know which philosopher laid out my moral platform for me, or it's just
mhm.
sort of like I have ideas about what's right and wrong, or it changes a lot. Like having, talk about knowing each other for like the last year. So over the last year or so, my thinking on so many issues has changed just because of my
Yeah.
friends, who my friends are, has changed. And so I have a much different perspective on morality because there's so many things that people have influenced me on that, what I think is acceptable or best has changed.
Do you think the social contract plays into that? The idea that we sort of let people create these rules to govern us as long as they are, like we talked earlier about sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We allow people to create these rules as long as they are not violating certain things like our autonomy, for instance, which is another one of the important things, or our safety and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think we do, especially in our interpersonal relationships. Where it gets tricky is there's a lot of these things where we don't necessarily consent to be governed, although we kind of just go along with it because the consequences of not doing so are usually pretty dire.
Right.
And we technically have the freedom to work for who we want and the type of work we want, but we have to
There's
actually
a
get
lot of
employment. So
yeah,
there's,
yeah.
at the end of the day,
A
you're
lot of
gonna.
restrictive
There's a
factors,
lot of
yeah.
restrictive factors. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think that's, to me, that's an important part of my current understanding of what's moral is that we should be working to increase the autonomy of the average person. So like growing
Mm,
up, a big part of my morality was I thought it was really moral to be hardworking. Now I think that's fine, but I think it's morally really important to not tie somebody's material well-being to how much dollars they generate for someone else. Like, I've taken
yeah.
seriously the idea that in a moral system, you'd sort of be okay with just the random birth lottery. So
Mhm.
the random birth lottery means I might be born disabled. I might be born of below average intelligence. I might be born of below average talent. Do I want to live in a world where that means I can't maybe own a home and send my kids to a decent school or, go out for a nice night on the town with my spouse just because I'm not exceptional? I don't like
Yeah.
that. I'd
That
rather live in
that
a
sort of
system,
that sort
like
of sounds like veil of ignorance, like John Rawls' veil of ignorance, which says that you should design a society not knowing where
exactly. That's
you're
exactly
going.
where it comes from.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
I didn't know that growing up, so I wouldn't have
Right,
had that
right.
same. But now
Yeah.
learning about that, and I learned about it a time ago, but then I took it more seriously. Like, no,
Mm,
I think that's a really good idea to help
mm.
move us in the right direction. And so you got to be willing to be born deaf, dumb, and blind,
Right, right.
and think about what type of world do you want to live in under those situations.
Mm.
And I go, this isn't it, because you probably end up a lot of people who are born in those situations end up destitute, and that's through no fault of their own. And I don't think that that's right.
And so I think what most people miss is sort of that idea that, well, hey, if I was born in sort of a ghetto and grew up as a gangbanger, I would want the opportunity to be able to, you know, get out of that lifestyle instead of being on the treadmill. I think that sort of ties into when you're saying people are looking down
Mm,
on those people, when really a lot of the time they are victims of their circumstance. I'm not
yes.
saying that everything they did was right. It's just, if that were me, I would like the society to offer me an opportunity to, not continue being a
Yeah.
victim of that
Also,
circumstance.
it creates a problem too, because then a lot of times you have to leave behind your community or your culture to put yourself in a better situation, and
Mm,
that is a problem, for like
yeah,
my parents generation and a lot of people, it was really about getting out of the hood, or
yeah,
if you were in the deep south, getting out of the backwoods, the
the
sticks,
dirty
wherever, yeah, wherever was in poverty, and a lot of times that meant moving out of a black community and into a white one. Well, now you got the problem, you're dealing with a lot more racism, because like I used to always tell people, it's this weird thing where a lot of times, like black people, sometimes in my family who lived in more urban environments, they would make fun of me. They would treat me like I wasn't really black growing up, right? Because I'm with around a lot of white kids and stuff like that.
right, right, yeah,
But I would feel like, no, I have to deal with being black every day. I deal with people wanting to beat me up, people threatening me, people calling me the N-word. I deal with all types of stuff as a result of being black on a day-to-day basis. I realize that interacts with the privilege of living in the suburbs and going to a private school and all this. But one of the benefits to me, because again, I was dealing with that type of bullying and stuff. One of the benefits to me of being in an urban environment was you went to a school where most of the people were black. And so maybe you weren't, maybe you didn't see yourself as being in the best situation, but at least you being black wasn't weird and a threat to your safety.
Right.
And so there's this weird thing where for a lot of people, being upwardly mobile unfortunately means leaving behind your community. And it should not be that way. If there was a more equal economic opportunity, people would, be more comfortable staying where they're at. Yeah.
So rather than encourage people to get out of the community, really, we should be uplifting the community to have the same opportunities as everywhere else. And then people could have that mobility yet not leave the community.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with that. Absolutely. This seems like a really good place to sort of wrap it up. I didn't know I had one question. So if you do have any questions for Dr. J. Bundy, please put it in the chat. I usually go about an hour to an hour and a half. We've definitely gone over, so I apologize, Jay.
Oh yeah, no worries. It was great catching up, Mark. Always fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got to drop into your channel more.
We'll have to. We'll do this again. We could have a follow-up conversation. I'm sure there's lots we could talk about.
Absolutely. I'm just trying to find the question that I had. So Al Trucker, if evolution is constant, why are young Earth creationists clueless?
Well, evolution is not constant, so that was an easy one.
Yeah.
It's funny though. I will say this about this, and maybe
they found an evolutionary niche. Did you ever think about that? They're like sharks. They found a niche.
Mark, I'll just say there's a lot to that idea. We could do a whole podcast on that idea because I really think that deserves some thought. But I will say this too. I sort of use it as a litmus test. I'll sometimes see if someone accepts evolution, and I often imply that someone isn't worth arguing with if they don't. But my point a lot of times, if someone is demanding an argument from me, but they don't accept the most well-evidenced theory in the history of science, there's a good argument to be made that it doesn't matter, right? that they're about impervious to evidence.
Impervious to evidence. I don't know how you would live your life being because to be intellectually consistent, you would have to be impervious to, medical evidence, for instance. That past helps with a broken bone, or that your computer works by. Really, why it is this one thing that conflicts with your religious beliefs that you're rejecting, not all of the other things.
Yes, very selective.
Yeah, so that's something that definitely has sort of occurred to me, and lately I've been thinking about how apologetics is kind of the very methodology of it is opposite to science. That science, you do the observation and then you create a hypothesis, etc., and then do testing and try to falsify. Apologetics is you have the answer and then you're trying to find, the reasons why that assumption in the first place is true. It's kind of the exact opposite methodology in some ways.
So here's a question for you, Mark. Do you think theology is apologetics? Because I heard somebody say that recently, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, that's a hot take."
No, absolutely not. No, theology is the study of religion. I mean, you can be an atheist and do theology. It's the study of religions. Apologetics is is arguing on the truth statement of religion. It is basically it's basically validating or it's backing up or it's providing evidence for. I'm not sure what term I would use, but it's basically arguing on behalf of why that a religion or religions are true. So I think that the difference here is that, I mean, you can be an apologist and still do theology. You can study a
Sure,
religion
sure,
and all
sure,
that kind
sure.
of stuff.
No, I think
But
I'd agree with your
yeah,
distinction. Yeah. No, I
yeah,
think
yeah,
I
yeah.
agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we have any more questions, actually. It was kind of short and sweet. I think we covered a lot, a whole lot, Jay. But you can talk and I can talk, definitely. So
Yeah.
yeah, it doesn't surprise me in the slightest. No
Somebody
problem.
asked what the science has to do with racism. I don't get it. I'm not sure what you mean by the question, but
NetTube user, yeah, I see it.
yeah,
Um,
it can definitely. I mean, I think there's science is just a methodology and it can be used
right,
for anything. And so I think science has helped us. One, when we say that race is a social construct, science has helped us understand that. And that's what Mark was talking about when we say there's more variation within a population. So what we mean by that, if you charted out intelligence of white people, you would see some bell curve, let's say. If you did the same for black people, you would say some bell curve. And those each of those bell curves would overlap, and there'd be so much overlap between them that you wouldn't see a nice, clean segregation between the groups. In other words, so there's more variation within the group than there is between them. And so science has helped us understand that. And even though racism is still wrong, even if it didn't give us that result, but that's
mhm,
certainly very helpful. And then science has helped us understand the consequences of racism, the effects of
right.
racism, how racism works, implicit bias, all of these sorts of things. So
Yeah, and that's where my mind went. Like, we can definitely use sort of things like statistical data analysis to understand how racism is playing a role in, through
yes,
sociology in our culture, and in our, people's lived experiences. Um, I mean, I actually, I forgot to mention this. I spoke to somebody just last night, for me, probably this morning for you, that was sort of saying, hey, we should, like they said, oh, well, if a company has two people, a white and a black person, and both of them have committed the same crime, they should be fine to use African American increased recidivism rates, like statistics, to choose the white. And I'm like, that, how do you not understand that's racism? Like, how do you not understand that using the statistics to say, hey, if the entire population has a generalization towards this, you can't put that on one person of that rate. Like, how do you not understand that? Was very, very interesting, because that's exactly like when you are judging one person by general trends of the entire race of that, that is the literal, that is exactly what
yeah,
racism is. Like,
yeah. I heard a great one today too. There was a study of basically people's responses to scenes on a screen, like think movie scenes, and they were basically able to show that the brain activity a lot of times of white people, if they see black characters on the screen doing mundane things, is like almost as the same as if the screen is blank, right? And they talk about it as an empathy gap, and somebody was
okay,
using that to help explain that why a lot of the successful black movies feature trauma. And the theory is that it features trauma to overcome this empathy gap. Even movie executives know, if you want people to really go out and go out of their way to see a black story, there's got to be something to make up for that empathy gap. Because just seeing black people do normal everyday stuff
mhm,
doesn't get a response out of people. So that was totally fascinating. And again, you trust me,
mhm,
movie executives, they know this study, they know those data, and
right.
that's the type of thing that goes into pick and choosing, what we're gonna spend $100 million to put in front of you and what we're gonna say thanks but no thanks.
Do you think that empathy gap exists for other groups? Like, we have these,
Yes, yes, yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
like there
Yeah.
was a really famous study that I paid attention to, because it was that atheists are more generous towards people outside of their in group, and religious people generally will only stick to their in group for charity kind of thing, which made a lot of sense to me. How, we only see them, give away money for
To the
food if
church. Yeah, yeah.
well,
Yeah.
not just that, but they will ask for you to do a sermon or do something in order to receive this charity. Whereas, someone like an atheist would just go, just have it. I don't need anything from you in exchange. It kind of made a lot of sense to me. But do you think there's also a empathy gap with sort of religious beliefs and in the church?
Yeah, so I don't, I don't know all the details of that particular study, but yeah, I definitely
Okay.
think so. I definitely think the literature on implicit bias suggests that there's implicit bias with a lot of different groups. Um, yeah, absolutely. Somebody asked about Pan-Africanism.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I was coming up, there was a big like back to Africa thing. Um, and it was weird how it played out in my life because I always thought of like the back to Africa thing as like racism, because I lived at a time people would say that to you, like go back to Africa or whatever. And so I didn't like that, like don't say go back to Africa to me. Those might be fighting words. And then also like I said, my mom's a corporate executive, and so they were trying to get down with the DEI back in the 90s, and my mom was like a model for like a department store that wanted to integrate like traditional African like patterns and stuff like into their corporate wear. So my mom like modeled like corporate
Okay.
outfits with like little like African stripes and just like weird.
Mhm.
It's just this weird stuff. So yeah, I think there's some of that stuff that's important. Like, people go back to Ghana and they connect with like a certain empowerment to see Black people just doing things on a different scale in a different way or celebrated, and I think it's important. Um, the genealogies of Black Americans prior to slavery, yes, absolutely worth pursuing. Don't know how many extra hurdles there are there, but I'll tell you this. Stephanie Helms, the lovely Stephanie Helms, a good friend, should subscribe to her channel. She showed me her genealogy, and I thought it was a dissertation because it actually looked like a dissertation, like a thick book. In my family, I have an aunt who tried to make our genealogy. That's how I know I come from like 5 generations of ministers, but it really only goes back to like the plantations and stuff. And so it looks
Mm,
like a really thin, like a book report of like an 8th grader,
yeah.
like when you bind the book report in like plastic or whatever. And so the comparison of Stephanie's dissertation on her family's history versus my book report on my family's
Mm,
history was a very vivid example of why, yes, accurate genealogies of Black Americans prior to slavery are worth pursuing. Yeah, because if
yeah.
not,
Yeah.
then knowing your history and understanding your lineage and all that becomes a privilege white people have that Black people don't. Yeah.
And I think it also shows the sort of one of the level of catastrophic impact of colonialism. And I think it was Lindsay Ellis who sort of was a YouTuber that sort of said, that colonialism is baked into every culture on the planet, and you have to understand that. It has to be understood that we are, there is nothing that colonialism hasn't touched that exists today, and sort of being aware of it and sensitive to it is just sort of the start of understanding that we're living in the sort of just past a point where one event, and that is colonialism, just had a profound impact on the entire world, and it can't be underestimated. And I hadn't thought about it like that until somebody said something. So I think it's really important that we talk about this and talk about what impact it's had, how it affects, the people coming out of it, how it affects people descended from the people affected by it, and sort of looking at genealogies. Absolutely, because we want to know, you know, who who has been affected and what happened to them and all of this stuff,
Yes.
so
Yes.
we don't repeat the same mistakes over again. We can avoid doing the same things to other people. So I think it's incredibly important.
Yeah, and I think we're in
um,
that
yeah.
transition where sort of the status quo, the world order we're talking about, even like the conflict in the Middle East, is we still see the status quo that it's based on a lot of those colonial interests sort of butting up against a new world order. One of the things I articulate to my family is I think young people, progressive people, I think genuinely want a new world order. I think people are genuinely frustrated with colonialism. They're genuinely frustrated with capitalism. They're trying to create more equity with the global South. They're trying to create more DEI. We're no longer okay with women being less than men. We don't want queer people being less than straight people. I mean, that's a new world order, y'all. Like, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it doesn't need to be a destruction of all of your culture. And, you know, people think about this sort of a new world order as it has to be a conglomeration of shadow powers doing it. But that isn't necessarily what the order has to be. Like, there is a conspiracy theory about a new world order where the
no. I'm thinking, no, this is just grassroots. People trying to change what is acceptable in our environment, right? Yeah.
Beheaded Kamikaze, thank you so much, Beheaded Kamikaze. You really appreciate you, mate. But Jade, do audiences watching white people doing mundane things elicit a different response?
Yeah, that's the key question. I actually want to go read the study, especially now that I mentioned it. But I literally was just watching a video where it came up on. So I think the idea is that there's some sort of baseline empathy that we should have or elicit that response, and that Black people are getting sort of more of a dead end response, like we're not having the proper emotion towards them that we should. But yeah, I don't know exactly what the study said, so I won't cite a study that I haven't read.
No, that's totally fair. I do have a thought on that, though. How many rom-coms are there of white people and Black people, respectively? Maybe you can think about that for a little bit. Like,
that's kind of where this person was going with it. Matter of fact, they brought up actually a couple examples of even like really successful Black shows that do show mundane things, but they talked about how they're perceived differently, or they're like considered unexpected success. They're rather rare. It was really interesting. So the video is called "Why Trauma Porn Sells," I think. If you guys want to look it up, it's a YouTube video.
Okay.
I think it's definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, and Beheaded goes on to say, yeah, Friends could have more Black people. It could have been very different. Yeah, I
exactly. Yeah.
I didn't watch Friends. I watched a show called News Radio about that time because I grew up during that era. I've got no idea about Friends, and it basically had one Black woman in it working in radio. And they even did that. They were really self-aware. They even did an episode where she was imagining all of her co-workers were Black and sort of, had like a Friends set, but instead it was all Black people kind of thing. And it was kind of this, it was giving this is like a token, we've put the token Black person in, but it kind of sucks for her, being a woman and being Black, having to work in this environment where it's just mostly white men and then white women and then,
just you.
Just you. Yeah.
And I can think of, I was gonna say, I can think of some exceptions. So one would be, for instance, like the Cosby Show, right? That was a show. I know Bill Cosby's not a good, but that show was very like not traumatic. They were just a normal family kind of dealing with whatever incidents came up in the household. Or you have a show like I grew up on, like in Living Color, not in Living Color, Living Single, which was a show about Black women who lived in an apartment together. That show was not about trauma and was all cozy, but it's considered a Black show. In other words, it can show that Black people watch, was popular amongst Black people, but didn't have the same crossover appeal as something like the Cosby Show.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I loved Fresh Prince kind of thing. That was cool.
Yeah, it's a good comedy example. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that took some severe right turns into trauma though, which I like it when a show does do that, like it has the lighthearted, but the characters are real because they have real problems, and I really liked it. But I think that's a great place to leave it, talking about really good shows. And there was absolutely nothing wrong with the Cosby Show. There was definitely something wrong with Bill Cosby, but there was nothing wrong with the show. It's just really unfortunate.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Yeah, so unfortunate.
Yeah. And yes, John Opheb, that was the one with Baby Rogan on it. So Joe Rogan was in that show, yes, as well as Stephen Root and a few other people that were just amazing. Actually, the show closed because of some stuff that happened, but yes, News Radio was that one. But I want to thank you so much. We're on 2 hours. I'm so sorry, Jay.
No problem, Mark.
I
Anytime.
promise you an hour and a
It's
half.
all right. It's all right.
No, it's just I do this every time. I say to somebody like, you'll be on an hour and a half. It's an interesting conversation, and then like at 2 hours, I'm like, you know what? I wish I could talk more, but that's okay.
Yeah.
That's all right. But thank you everybody so much for joining me. Please give a big thank you to Jay, who took time out to come and speak with me. And it was a fantastic conversation. So thank you so much, Jay. It's just amazing.
I appreciate the invite. Anytime, Mark.
Yeah, my pleasure. We certainly do have to talk more. And I would like you to go over, give Jay a like, check out his channel. If
Pocket Locker
somebody,
86.
yeah, and you have also Gather on as well. So I've been
Yes, Gather's where we hang out offline. So yeah, definitely come hang out and Gather. I think oh yeah, you dropped the link. There's a link there. That's perfect. Great. Yeah,
Yeah, I've been
come
trying
hang
to
out.
copy things over because you've got a bot doing all of your links. And I've
Yeah,
been trying to keep up. I gotta set up something like that, but never mind. But thank you, Jay. And do you have anything else? What are you up to? Where
I host a show every Sunday with my one black friend. Other than that, I do podcasts from time to time. So yeah, come over. I don't really schedule my stream so much, but I try to do one earlier in the week, one later in the week, and then I have the show on Sunday. So
yeah, so go check out Jay, especially if you like evolution, social issues,
yes,
and things, political issues and things
absolutely,
like that. You're doing
yes,
fantastic work
yes.
over there. And as I said, I really want to thank you for putting out that video. It like I I'm aware of my lack of understanding of these certain cultural things that I'm just not exposed to. And I don't want to be that ignorant person that's like, well, if I don't encounter it, it's not important kind of thing. Like it really made me curious. So some fantastic videos over there. Thank you so much. And don't forget to like, subscribe if you can, if you feel like it. That would be very, very helpful. Share with your friends if you think it's been a good conversation that people would benefit from. Absolutely. And comment if you do want to see anything else or suggestions for who I should interview next. If you do want to see somebody, I'll try to grab them. But I want to do these conversations more because I think they're incredibly beneficial. But again, I want to thank my guest. Don't forget to be kind to yourself, be kind to each other, and have a good, fantastic day. Thank you very much, everyone.
All right.
Bye-bye. I've lost the outro. I had to do something wrong. Give me 1 second. I just have to. There it is.